board here. Awesome. Okay, let me share my screen. So I wanted to go through, in particular, the counteroffer. We had talked about the purchase agreement and all of those pieces. And hang on, I want to share my screen a different way so we can actually see what's going on. Ding. There we go. We had talked about the purchase agreement and all of the different pieces, but after you write the purchase agreement and if you submit it as a buyer's agent, you will probably get a counteroffer back. And a counteroffer is one page, usually. Sometimes there's extra pages, but it's usually just one page. And it just changes the pieces of the original offer that need to be changed. Okay. This does not, you counteroffers do not stack on each other. So if you change a whole bunch of stuff on one counteroffer, um, then you need, but you're only changing one more thing. Say the seller comes back and says he wants a different purchase price, different earnest money, different closing date. Okay. And your buyer is fine with more earnest money, different closing date, but they're not fine with the purchase price. Then when you go to write your counteroffer that's going to go to the sellers, that your buyers will sign and go to the sellers, you on your counteroffer is going to put the closing date that the seller's fine with, that they've changed it to on the last counter. You're going to put the earnest money that your buyer's fine with. Okay. And then you'll put your buyer's purchase price that they're countering back as. So before, and I'm only telling you this in case you run across older agents who don't remember that this has changed. In the before time, we would only send a counter for the things we were changing, and the counters would stack on top of each other. One would change the closing date, the next one would change the purchase price, the next one would change the financing, the next one, the next one, the next one. But they would all be part of the contract. Now, there will only ever be one counteroffer that changes your original offer. Okay. So anything that your buyer or your seller, depending on where you are in the back and forth, anything that your client agrees to on the counter that's been presented to you needs to be added to the counter that you're writing and then whatever you're changing. Okay. That's the biggest piece about counter offers. Hopefully this has been changed now for about 7 to 10 years, give or take. Well, it has to be more like 7. But just FYI, it's been a while since this changed. There are some old agents out there who have been who are in the business for a very long time and don't always quite remember what the changes are because they do happen quite often. So I get that. Okay, first things first, date. This is the date that you are writing the counter offer. Okay, that should be easy enough. Number 2 is page 1. This is only one page of something. If you add more pages, you need to go in the other category and say, see attached. Oops, if I can spell right. Attached whatever pages. Okay. Most of the time, you're not going to be attaching any extra pages. Most of the time, these are little changes. They're quick and easy. Okay. But if you do, that's how you do that. Next line on line 3 is the date of the purchase agreement. So like we talked about before, this is not the final acceptance date. This is that reference date on the very top of every page on line 1 of the purchase agreement. Okay. That's what this reference date is talking about. And then the address of the property. Um, blah, 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 address of the property. Okay. Then it says this counteroffer does not include the terms or conditions in any previous counteroffers. Okay. They put it in bold. This has been such a big deal for people to get this. They put it in bold and at the very top of the form. That's why I went over it at the beginning. Okay. This counteroffer is only valid upon signature and delivery of the purchase agreement, meaning the buyer has a purchase agreement, signs it, sends it to the seller. The seller wants to counter. Seller signs the purchase agreement as it has been given to them. They check the box on that last page of the purchase agreement saying that this offer has a counteroffer. And then they write up the counteroffer. Seller signs that one and sends it back to the buyer. That agreement is not agreed to, that purchase agreement, even though the seller has signed the full purchase agreement, because they checked that counteroffer box, the offer is not accepted until this counteroffer is agreed to by all parties. Okay. You will get sellers who will say that they don't feel comfortable signing the offer that the buyer has given them because they don't fully understand that it is not valid because we have a counteroffer, because we've checked that box. So if you have sellers that push back against you, please push them to not only the checkbox on the signature page on the purchase agreement that says this is not valid unless the counter is signed, but also to line 7. This counter offer is valid only upon signature and delivery of the purchase agreement. Okay, which means the seller needs to sign the purchase agreement and deliver it back to the buyer. And then you only have to do that once, right? You can have send counter offers back and forth 18 million times. You can do one every hour if you want. It doesn't matter how many counter offers that you write up and you do, but your clients only have to sign the actual big bunch of pages purchase agreement once. Okay. And then you
Mhm.
can just go back with the one page. Ding, 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 ding. I think the longest negotiation I had was 6 weeks. Okay, so it happens sometimes. Usually it's not that long. Usually there's two or three counters going back and forth, and then you come to an agreement or one party walks away, right?
Yeah, I've
Uh,
had one that was 2 weeks long, and it was because we were going back and forth with New York City, and my buyer here in well, it was actually in Alexandria, didn't get done working until after 10 o'clock at night.
right.
So
Hmm.
everything that was done the next day because New York, everybody's in bed by 10 o'clock our time.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
we
Yeah.
went on, we went back and forth, I think 35 times.
Yep. I had a client who was based in Germany.
Mm,
So he was a military officer in Germany. And so that's the next day.
yep.
They're on the next day.
Mhm,
And so that it just sometimes it takes a while. We are in an immediate information age. I get that, but sometimes it takes a while.
yeah.
Also, sometimes your clients need a minute to think about it. Your clients need a minute to take their emotions out of it, right? Whatever they're doing back and forth, and sleep on it for a night to determine if this is the right decision for them or not. That's okay too. Time is of the essence. You're absolutely right. It's in the purchase agreement, it's there. That does not mean that you have to rush or go as fast as possible. That's not what that means. Hmm. Yeah. Two 2 weeks. Oh yes. Um, Perfect. The next piece of this talks about the purchase agreement, and the purchase agreement is rejected. So this goes back to this will help you talk to your sellers to sign the purchase agreement. And the following counteroffer is hereby made. This is this document we're filling out. All terms and conditions remain the same as the stated purchase agreement, meaning we're not changing anything else in the purchase agreement except the following. And then it gives you a whole bunch of options. Okay. This form used to be very short, where it was purchase agreement, purchase price, earnest money, closing date. And then the rest of this was the other category. As years have gone by, they've added other things that are usually a part of negotiation. That doesn't mean that you can't negotiate other things that are in the purchase agreement. This is just the state saying, we know you guys use these often. And so we're going to go ahead and put them right on the counter so that you don't have to go find the purchase agreement line that the closing date is on, or change the mortgage financing in a certain way. We're going to streamline line this for you. Okay. First piece is the purchase price. Now, the fun part about this purchase price is when you change it here to, let's say, 180,000. Don't forget to check that box. Um, that it also changes the FHA escape clause in the purchase agreement. So if you remember way back when we were in the financing contingency, if the FHA escape clause talks about if the property doesn't appraise for the sales price, and then you have to put in the number of the sales price, right? Then this buyer can cancel the purchase agreement, doesn't have to move forward, blah, 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 blah. This purchase price not only changes the purchase price on the front page, on the first page of the purchase agreement, but also the FHA escape clause. Okay. Then, next one's pretty easy. Earnest money shall be a total of blank. Buyer gives you a contract with earnest money of zero. There better be a really good reason for there to be zero on that purchase agreement. Is it still legal if the seller's willing to agree to no earnest money? Absolutely. Absolutely. You do not need earnest money to have a valid purchase agreement. But on the seller side of things, I'm going to be asking some pretty hard questions about why does your buyer not have any money to put down, even if it's only $500, right? Or are they waiting for a paycheck? Right? They have the money, but they're waiting for the bonus. It's supposed to be here next week, but it's not here yet. So they can't hit the deadlines, right? This is why we ask these questions. Because if that's the case, that's an easy fix. Then we just extend the earnest money submission timeline. That's normally 2 days, right? But we would just extend it in a counteroffer to a little longer. No problem, right? So be asking questions if there's zero. And if you're on the buyer side, be ready to answer those questions when you get them from the listing agent. Then
No,
next,
my
yeah,
first my first buyer that I ever had, we had to wait on confirmation of job. This was
yes.
when the state of Minnesota was still monkeying around with hiring teachers, and we had to
Mhm.
wait for a month before we could actually finalize everything because we didn't know if they were going to have a job. And
Okay.
so we had to wait, and the earnest money had to wait until then to get collected because
Yep.
we had to wait on everything. And then that
Hmm.
one got to be a complete cluster because the uncle had passed away during the waiting process, and it was a brand new
Okay.
construction home. So they were still in the process of getting everything all finalized. Well, the uncle died, and then at the funeral, the grandmother passed away. And
Hmm.
then at the grandmother, well, before the grandmother's funeral, he hit a deer and totaled his car. And so just before the closing, he bought a different vehicle.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
we had
Of
to get
course he did.
everything reapproved through the finance company because
Hmm.
everything got messed up, and yeah, it was a big cluster, but
Oh,
it finally did close, and yeah, it was something.
right. As long as it's legal, as long as it's legal, you can change most things in the purchase agreement, right? We do not recommend it. The purchase agreement and those rules are written for a certain way, but there are extenuating circumstances like yours that you just talked about that require us to change those rules that are set in the purchase agreement, right? To better serve our client.
Yeah, and luckily it was a builder's house that he was
Okay.
in the process of actually building because he had the time to delay things, whereas a
Right.
normal seller they probably wouldn't have been as lenient to get everything all finalized.
Absolutely. Yep. Because they would want to move on with their life. Yep.
They'd want to know. They'd want to be
Yeah.
certain. Okay, I'm going to be selling it on this date, and I can buy my house on this date right after. So it's like, well, everybody wins, and you just domino effect. But
Yep.
it's just that's how it goes.
Absolutely. Yep. All right, line 14 and 15 talk about percentage of cash or mortgage financing. If you're changing one of these, you should be changing the other one at the same time. So this is on the first page of the purchase agreement. So normally for a conventional loan, and I say normally in broad terms, right? Because there's lots of different loan types. But normally it's 20% cash, 80% financing. If you're changing that at all, say you get a counterback from the seller, and your buyer realizes, oh, wait, I don't have 20% down. I need to do a 5% down conventional loan. This is where you change it, right? After you've written the offer. But then you'll be changing both of these, cash of 5%, mortgage of 95, right? So these two go together. If you're changing one, you're going to be changing the other one. Perfect. Next one's super easy. You're changing the closing date. Now, don't put on or before. I know everybody loves to put on or before, and they think it gives everybody the ability to move things around and do things. But there are some lawsuits going through because it's an ambiguous date. These are legal contracts. We should not be ambiguous within our legal contracts. If the buyer's ready to close 3 weeks before closing and the seller's not ready to move out yet, who determines when on or before is,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That brings me to another transaction I had with
Hmm.
somebody who was a Chinese national.
Yes.
And when your seller is from China and they get okay, the closing date is going to be this date, what's the first phone call that they make? Well, that would be their travel agent because they're buying a
Hmm.
ticket back to their homeland. And
Yeah.
so if you delay things, which is what happened on that one, and the guy's name who was the agent was Randy Fisher. This was one of
Mhm.
our our couple of deals that we did with him that weren't real savory, and we'll put it
Mm,
that way. And he guaranteed that there should be nothing there will be no delays in this whatsoever, and sure enough there was delays.
yeah.
And of course my seller was very understanding about why we have delays when there was a guarantee that there will be no delays. And
Hmm.
it kind of threw a wrench in the works. And luckily enough, he stopped out in San Francisco to see his daughter for a couple of weeks so that we could get the money processed
Okay.
and get them the funds from the transaction. But
Yeah.
it's one of those things that everything when you put it on here, they think it's all in stone,
Right.
and it's not.
And that's exactly where the lawsuits are coming from,
Mm-hmm.
right there. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
When you put a date in here, it needs to be a date,
Yep.
not open-ended,
Yep.
not sometime in the future, right? Not 6 weeks from some ambiguous date. It needs to be a solid date.
Well, and even when I bought this place in Moorhead, when I put the closing date in, we had to change it because um, they needed a certain date for their finance thing to do their next house, and so
Mhm.
I had to put in there the exact date, and then we had to change it because it didn't line up with their closing for their next place, and they didn't want to be homeless in the transition.
Right.
That's
Yeah, and that's the thing is that yes, this date has to be specific, but buyer and seller can agree to amend it at any point.
yeah.
That's up to them, right? If it works for their schedules, if the seller needs a little more time, if the buyer wants to get in early, it doesn't matter what the situation is. They can amend it at any time.
Yeah.
But when you're writing the purchase agreement, it needs to be a solid date. And I get that it's easier to put on or before. Because then if they do want to close early and everyone's happy-go-lucky and they're good with that, because most of the time the buyer wants to get in the house, the seller wants to get their money and leave, right? So most of the time clients do want to move in early as possible. I get it. But the closing date doesn't mean that the closing has to happen on that date. It means that the closing date has to happen by that date and no later. Otherwise, cancellation amendments go into play that are already in the purchase agreement.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's why when I bought mine, we had to delay it so that they could get into their house
Yes.
because their timeline over there was different and they couldn't change
Yes.
it, and so
Yes.
we uh, we had to delay things. Even though I was a cash buyer, and I'm like, I just write a check,
Yeah.
you know,
You were ready to go whenever
I
they
was ready
were.
to go. We could
Yep.
do whatever, and yet they delayed it. So
Okay.
it was it is what it is.
It is. It happens sometimes. And it's really like your clients, as you talk to them, might be very frustrated if a closing date has to get delayed or if a closing date's being asked to move up and they're already stressed out. Give them grace. Give your clients grace because you don't know what everything is going on in their world at the moment, right? Give them grace. Let them have time to think and cool down. Don't rush. And usually people will be okay. Be their listening ear, right? Listen to them rant about it because they got to get it off their chest. If the closing has to be delayed from the seller side and they've already made an offer on another house and they have to close on this one to be able to get that one and blah blah blah. Like
Mhm.
there's a lot of stress associated with that. And it's part of our job to be the calm harbor for everybody, right? And to look at all of these things and say, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that our clients' interests are at the top of this heap. But sometimes that means taking the long-term view. And if we're only extending the closing date by 3 days instead of 3 weeks, and the seller's having a meltdown about it,
Oof.
sometimes it's our job to bring the seller to their senses. This is only 3 days, right? There's 365 days in a year.
Hmm.
3 days is not going to matter. In 10 years, are you going to remember that this was 3 days later than you originally planned? No. There are times where that's not true. And the seller does have to close at a certain time period. I get that. But most of the time, by being the calm harbor and talking to them about those things, you can get them over it, right? You can get it through. Um, and that's it's the mark of a good agent when you can give the client your ear, talk to them on their level, to be able to get them to see logic and reason within a very stressful and emotional time in their life. I get it. We they call us fake therapists for a reason, okay? Because we do those things. Okay, line 17 talks about the seller agrees to complete all FHA lender required repairs, not to exceed whatever amount you're going to put in here. So these are the work orders that are referenced in the purchase agreement within the mortgage finance contingency. That you can ask as a buyer, you can ask the seller to just agree upfront to pay for a certain number, certain dollar amount of work that the lender requires on the property for them to be able to fund the property. Okay. These usually come into play when we have our low down payment loans. They don't usually come into play with any of our conventional stuff. They're definitely not going to come into play with cash offers, right? So if you want to negotiate that piece, say you're on the listing side, buyer's agent put in $2,000 or $10,000 or some crazy high number. If your seller agrees to that without countering, they're agreeing to spend up to $10,000 to fix anything that the lender says needs to be fixed without any negotiation whatsoever, right? So you're going to want to counter that. This is where you need to do that. So countering it $100 or $500, depending on what your seller's means are, is usually a good give. Is usually a good in between. Now, again, buyer and seller can amend that agreement at any point afterwards. Okay, so the lender comes back with a laundry list of things, and the seller's okay at this point with paying for all of it. You can always amend it. That's just fine. But up front, as a listing agent, it's better to hedge your bets and to keep that number very low. And then if you need to, open up negotiations afterwards. As a buyer's agent, it's great for that number to be super high for your
Mhm.
buyer. It's good for your buyer. Then you don't have to go back to into negotiations. Seller's already agreed to fix it. All done. Okay. There's a middle ground there that you'll find in negotiations, which is why this is here.
Mhm.
Next line is about buyer's closing costs, prepaids, insurance, and whatever else, not to exceed a dollar amount or a percentage of the sales price. So this is the seller's contributing to buyer's closing costs, right? This is not the buyer's broker compensation. This is just their closing costs, which with whatever the buyer needs. Okay. Um, how you fill this out, because I know some people get confused with this every once in a while. It says blah, blah, blah. Seller shall pay buyer's closing costs, prepaids, insurance, and it gives you a line to fill something in. Okay. The easy way to handle this is do any other closing costs, not to exceed, blah, blah, blah. If there is something specific that you need to call out that the seller is paying, then that's what you would use that. Okay. And then you would put in a dollar amount or a percentage. Okay. Next one is sellers contributing to buyers' brokers' compensation. So when the law changed a couple years ago and we had to start, our buyers had to start asking for
Mhm.
their agent to be paid in the purchase agreement, most of the time we had to counter the offers changing this in some way because either as a listing agent, we were paying them cooperating broker compensation directly, it was coming from the listing broker, not from the seller. And so it doesn't need to be in the purchase agreement because we have the cooperating broker agreement between broker to broker, right? So we would have to counter the offer to take that commission out of the purchase agreement because if you have cooperating broker and you agree to pay them in the purchase agreement, those stack on top of each other. You add them together. Okay. So the state last year put this into the counteroffer so it is easy for anybody to change it. Okay. So if a buyer's agent calls you and says, "Hey, are you offering cooperating broker compensation?" And you say, "Why, yes, I am. I'll send you over the document." And you send it and they sign it, that other agent signs it. And then that agent gives you an offer and has that same compensation in the offer. You, as the listing agent, need to make sure that you are countering that piece,
All right.
period. Otherwise, you will be paying double, and I guarantee your seller will tell you you can take it out of your commission to pay double so that they don't have to. Okay. So
Mm.
don't forget about that piece. And again, shall be dollar amount or a percent of the sales price. Then easy peasy, the other category. Anything else that you need to change? What I usually did with this other category, very rarely did I actually put anything specific in there. Um, what I usually did was I would fix or clarify things that other agents missed in the purchase agreement. So, line 117, the other agent left it blank, but it needs to be filled in. Line 117 shall be $4,000, right? And I would just reference the line in the purchase agreement that needed to be fixed, right? There are sometimes dual agency. Coldwell Banker, we are Coldwell Banker Crown Realtors. We pay Coldwell Banker Corporate for their name and all their other tools that they give us. They do give us lots of things, but we pay them for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That does not mean that we are the same company or dual agents with any other Coldwell Banker in the state. Unless the name is Coldwell Banker Crown Realtors, we are not dual agents. Coldwell Banker Realty agents in particular do not understand that. They think anybody with a Coldwell Banker name is a Coldwell Banker agent and we're dual agents. Wrong. Wrong. If you need to change dual agency, You can write it right in this other category, right? This purchase agreement does not constitute,
I'll be right
oh,
back.
of course, dual agency. Maybe not an exclamation point. That's probably not professional. Um, okay. And then you could say lines blah 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 shall be okay. So that's what you use the other category for. You can also, as you can see, we have the clauses there, the clauses button. So you can also use the office clauses if you do need to add something um, to there. Okay. Then at the bottom, your seller's going to sign, your buyer's going to sign. Hopefully they both sign on the same one, and then you have an accepted purchase agreement. We like that. And then you'd write it once everybody's signed and everything's delivered, then you'd write in the final acceptance date. Okay. Final acceptance date is going to be down here on the bottom. And then you attach the purchase agreement and the counteroffer and any other addendums. And that's your fully executed purchase agreement. Okay. Okay. That's the counteroffer form. Then there are two, we'll go over just one other form and then we'll take off for the day. Last time we talked about the buyer's sale of home contingency. So the buyer had to sell a home to be able to buy this one. And that becomes a contingency. It becomes an addendum to the purchase agreement. Well, we have the opposite happen too sometimes, especially when our inventory is low, is that the seller needs to find a place to live before they can agree to sell their property. So we have this addendum to purchase agreement, seller's purchase or lease contingency. Again, date on line one is going to be the date that you're writing, that you're putting this together, that you're writing it. Line number three, that date is going to be the date of the purchase agreement on line one of the purchase agreement. Line five is going to be the address. Easy peasy, right? Then it goes on to say this purchase agreement is contingent upon the seller finding another property to purchase or lease, which agents used to just write that into the purchase agreement with no other wording whatsoever. How long do the sellers have to find it? What happens if they can't find something? Who gets the earnest money back? Which is why the state was like, we're going to come up with our own form so that we make sure all of these pieces are taken care of. Okay. Seller shall, in good faith, upon final acceptance date, work to find a property to purchase or lease. That means that they can't sit on their butt and do nothing and then say, sorry, buyer, I couldn't find anything. They have to be actively looking. If seller is unable to find a property acceptable to seller, seller may cancel this purchase agreement by providing written notice to the buyer or licensee of seller's intent to cancel no later than blank calendar days of final acceptance date, which they term the search period. Okay. This search period is going to be different based on your seller's needs, based on what the buyer's willing to agree to, and based on your area, right? If you only have a new listing in your area every other week, this search period that they call it could be 3 months, could be 90 days, right? But you also have to think about, is a buyer willing to wait 90 days for a seller to go find something? Probably not, right? It's a long time. There are times where I'm sure it would make sense, but that is a long time. My guess is, because I haven't seen a lot of these happen, most of the time sellers wait to put their property on the market until they know they have one. Okay. My guess is this days is going to be 30 days, right? Probably no more. Again, depending on the buyer's situation, depending on the seller's situation, depending on your market. But I, my rule of thumb would be 30 days for this one. Now, it says seller may remove this contingency at any time prior to the end of the search period by providing written notice to buyer or licensee. So that's as easy as an amendment saying seller has found a house. we shall move forward to closing. Or seller is removing their seller's purchase lease contingency, buyer and seller shall move forward to closing, right? Easy peasy, nice in writing. Then it goes on to say what happens if the seller does cancel the purchase agreement because they can't find a house. It says that they'll both sign a cancellation of purchase agreement and the direct all earnest money paid here to be refunded to the buyer. If seller doesn't cancel the purchase agreement, then this contingency shall be deemed removed. So if your seller goes past this calendar day's timeline, that this contingency is automatically removed and the seller agrees to move forward to closing, which matters when if the seller decides not to sell their property, buyer's not the one in breach of contract, seller is by choosing, yeah, just kidding, I changed my mind. Your seller could be legally liable for costs associated with that.
It's funny that this is brought up now as a form now because of the situation that happened
Hmm.
expressly between myself and Brandon. And
Oh,
my seller was the one that pulled the plug the week of closing because she couldn't find a place up in the Bemidji area to
hmm.
move to a suitable location up there, and she decided she wasn't going to sell.
Yeah,
So she pulled the plug the week
yeah.
of closing.
And I
So,
will say buyers usually get very angry about that, which is fair.
oh,
Seller is
absolutely.
seller is not required to sell their house. They are not required to do that.
Yep.
However, caveat to that, seller could be liable to the buyer for
For
costs.
expenses. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. And we had to
It's
draft up a document compensating them for putting their things in storage while they search for a different replacement house.
absolutely.
And that
Yep.
happens.
It does. Yep, it does. I mean, there are sellers who change their mind, who get all the way to it and they're like, "Oh, I actually love my house, right? I never want to sell." I
Well,
get
and
it.
she couldn't find anything that was in the price range after she sold her house for the
Yes.
money that she recouped from the house. So
Yes.
that was her big, sticking point. But
Hmm.
it happens.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we've all dealt with it. I guarantee it. If you're in the real estate business for at least 5 years, you have dealt with this at one point where your seller calls you after you've accepted an offer and they're like, "Yeah, we were talking and we really don't want to sell." If they tell you at the very beginning of the purchase agreement, you're more likely to let the buyer walk away fine and let the seller walk away fine, and nobody's angry about it. The closer you are to the closing date, the more angry the parties will be, the more likely you're going to have to put money on the line to be able to back out of that contract.
Yep, yep. I've also had it where the underwriter of the loan calls the week of closing and says, "We have a problem. We can't justify the price, so you need to drop the selling price $10,000 for it to close. And as a bonus, we'll be cutting your commission then as well."
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Had that happen.
Yep.
Not fun. And,
Those.
and seller
Yeah.
knew the buyer. They were good friends.
Yep. Yep. And they couldn't justify the price.
Yep.
Yep.
And so they had to drop it the week of the closing there again. And we ended up taking a smaller amount for the commission and then also taking a smaller percentage.
Right.
So it was a double whammy.
It was, absolutely it is. I mean, commission's already based off a sales price,
Yep.
and then if you have to lower it even more to make sure the seller, the buyer, whoever has
Yep.
enough money on the table to be able to do
Yep.
what they need to do,
Yep.
not fun. Not fun. And if you can avoid it, you should, but sometimes it happens. Hmm. I
Happens.
remember bringing to closing, I brought $100 to closing because my client had so many liens on the house. We spent weeks negotiating with all of them. And because of the timeline change and how long it took, her costs were $100 more than she had. And she had nothing. Nothing. She sold everything.
Yeah. And
$100 is a very small amount. I'll pay for it. I got
yeah.
it.
Yeah, well, that's a good outcome. So you fast
Yes.
forward 2 years later, that same buyer that had to do the $10,000 price reduction had to bring a check for $25,000 so that we could sell the house and get out of it. And
Ooh.
at the closing, this is kind of the weird and funny part, and not so cool to do anymore. But we're sitting in the lobby of the bank to do the closing, and we hear one of their agents yell across the bank, their social security number is da 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 da. I was just like, oh,
You're like, please don't.
whoops,
Uh-huh. So you want to throw something at them from across the bank, being like, walk, use your
dude.
feet.
Yeah, that's private. Don't do that.
Oh,
Don't do
geez.
that.
Okay. Last piece of this one, and then well, I'll let you guys all go. 16, 17, 18 talks about all inspections shall commence. Now, when it says all inspections, it means home inspection, radon, septic, well water, whatever inspection you have put into the purchase agreement will start depending on which box you choose. The first box is after the removal of this contingency. So seller has found a house, seller's told buyer, yep, we're good to go. Then the inspections start. Or the inspections happen as normally specified in the purchase agreement based on the final acceptance date, right? This is important, especially for your buyers for a home inspection. If they put in an offer and the seller needs to use this contingency to be able to find a house, the buyer doesn't want to waste their money, $600 on a home inspection. If the seller can't find something, that's not worth it to anybody.
Hmm.
So my recommendation is to do after the removal of this contingency. Okay. Now there might be a time where the seller is the one paying for all of these inspections, particularly if it's just the septic and the well water test. If the seller is the one paying for those, maybe they don't care that that contingency timeline starts right when you accept the offer. And they'll just do everything concurrently, right? Because the seller can take that inspection report and use it for the next buyer if they need to, right? So there are pieces to think about here. That's why they're two different checkboxes. So everybody can be on the same page. Because that's the biggest deal is everybody needs to be on the same page as to when those timelines start. Okay. And then, of course, the other category, if there's anything else that you need to put in there for this seller's purchase or lease contingency, then you can do it there. I've always thought, I've always tried to think of what you could possibly put in this other because it handles almost everything pretty well, right?
Mhm.
But if you do have anything that you would put in the other, let me know. If you think about anything, um, I'd be interested to run that down, do a thought experiment. And your seller signs, your buyer signs. If you going back to the other piece, the counteroffer, if you need to change anything with this addendum, you can do it on the counteroffer, right? If you want to change line 9, those calendar days as the buyer, you can do that by just referencing this on the counteroffer in that other category. Of course, this is before your offer is fully accepted. But just FYI. Okay. I think that's all I got for you guys today. And we're a little late, but that's okay. That's all I got for you guys today, and I will see you again next Thursday at 2 o'clock. Perfect. We'll see you later, Terry.